play for you guys really quick before we go to our next guest. Here is Donald Trump not taking responsibility. Let's recall, this is the man who we just talked about, exercises all this awesome power and revels in the power that he exercises until there's a problem. Now here is Donald Trump not taking responsibility for these floods.
Okay. Are you investigating whether some of the cuts to the federal government left key vacancies at the National Weather Service or in the emergency coordination?
No, they did not.
No, they didn't. I'll tell you, if you look at that, what a situation that all is, and that was really the Biden setup. That was not our setup, but I wouldn't blame Biden for it either. I would just say this is a 100-year catastrophe, and it's just so horrible to watch.
All right, we're gonna come out of that. That was Donald Trump on the tarmac, but yes, he was saying it was not me. It might, probably it was Biden's fault. Let's blame Biden. So you're super powerful, Donald. You're a super powerful autocrat until something goes wrong, and then the guy who you claimed brain was mush and who couldn't sign a piece of legislation without an auto pen, you claim the guy whose brain you say doesn't work, he did it. Okay, so he's so powerful that he can come back out of retirement as someone you said has Alzheimer's and be responsible for failing to react properly to the floods in Texas today when you're president. That's very interesting. Joe Biden has a lot of interesting powers. That must be the dark Brandon in him coming through. That is where we are. I want to note that Mayor Karen Bass, we've been furiously texting back and forth, and you see me here typing into my laptop here. We're trying to get Mayor Karen Bass online. She is moving and grooving, moving around on the city, because obviously she's got a lot going on. So we were not able to connect with her. Hopefully we'll be able to connect with her later, or maybe for a later show. We weren't able to do it. I do want to talk about another thing that's going on. Autocrats tend to like other autocrats. They tend to want to be with them and be together, and they tend to want to do business together. Bibi Netanyahu is an autocrat. He has been the prime minister of Israel for something like 15, 16 years. He was prime minister when Hamas was elected to run Gaza, and he encouraged that election because he wanted to divide the Palestinian people so that you had those on the West Bank run by Fatah, which is the organization that took over for the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It morphed into something called Fatah, which is a secular Palestinian political organization. And then there is Hamas, which was born in the 1980s amid the uprisings over the continued expansion by the then Ariel Sharon government into Palestinian territory. And so the anger about that is what fueled the rise of Hamas, that people said, well, we want something new. We want something different. And so by the time we got to the elections that George W. Bush demanded that Palestinians have in the early 2000s, he demanded that they hold elections, insisted that they must hold elections. So they had elections and Hamas won, because Hamas were the ones who were giving out food. They were the ones who were opening schools. They were the ones who were helping poor people who were struggling in this basically open air prison called Gaza. And so they got elected. Shocker. And then Bibi Netanyahu was like, great, let's take advantage. Let's divide these Palestinians so they never get a state. That's the bottom line. And he can keep allowing expansion in the West Bank. So Peter Binard, my good friend Peter Binard, he does his own Substack, which you should follow. He's a prolific writer, thinker, an educator on these matters. Peter Binard is going to join us to talk about the recent visit of Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House. He's visiting with Trump again. This is somebody who is an adjudicated war criminal. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for him should he travel to an ICC country, a country that actually adheres to the ICC, which the United States does not, nor does Israel, because of the adjudicated very likely genocide. They call it very likely genocide, but I think we all know it's genocide in Gaza. Peter Binard, thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you, Joy.
Let's talk about this visit. Why does Bibi Netanyahu have this open door? I mean, I guess it's obvious why he has an open door in Washington, because they share a policy goal, which is, I guess, turning Gaza into what Trump hotel resorts.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Israel has a kind of political support in the United States that is really different than most other countries. And Trump and Netanyahu, even though there have been some spats between the two of them, at the moment kind of seem somewhat aligned since America entered Israel's attack on Iran. I think Trump wants to he wants a ceasefire in Gaza. He wants to be able to take credit for that. And I think this visit is about basically figuring out how they can kind of package that or kind of force Hamas into some kind of terms that Israel can then claim is a victory.
And what does a victory mean at this point? Because it seems to me that the devastation that has been wrought in Gaza, you really can't come back from that and create any sort of a peaceful coexistence in that region. All the hospitals are destroyed or damaged. The universities are all destroyed. The antiquities in Gaza, all destroyed. More than 10,000 children dead. Starvation now kicking in, a deliberate starving of the people of Gaza, which is part of the reason the ICC adjudicated it a likely genocide. I don't even, what is the future at this point? A peace for what? A peace of, and also it doesn't seem that Israel is ever pulling out of Gaza.
Well, you're right. After this just unmitigated horror, there's a report from a British expert who studies this thing that says that he thinks 4% of the population of Gaza has been killed since October 7th, which is the highest percentage of a population that has been killed in any war, any conflict since in this century. The travesty of it is that even Israel's own supporters now are acknowledging that Israel did not achieve its goals, right? It destroyed, as you say, the buildings, the hospitals, the bakeries, the agriculture, left more amputated children than any other place on earth. But you know who's still there? Hamas is still there. And it basically, if you listen to Israeli political discourse, they are acknowledging that even though Hamas won't be the formal government in Gaza, they're going to claim that some other group, maybe some Arab governments or some other people are running it. Hamas is going to be there behind the scenes. They're not going to be disarmed. And they were going to, and Hamas will say, we won because we weren't actually destroyed, as Benjamin Netanyahu said we were going to be. So after all of this, after this slaughter beyond imagination, which even many Israeli-born scholars of genocide like Omer Bartov and Raz Sigal and Shmuel Lederman say now constitutes genocide, the aims of this war will not have been achieved. And they're going to package it as a victory because they're going to say that Israel restored its deterrent by bombing Lebanon and Syria and Iran. But in Gaza, Israel has lost.
Well, and they've expanded the war to Iran, which, yes, even the American people who are the most hawkish don't want that. Like the idea of the United States being dragged into a war with Iran, we didn't start it. Israel decided they want to start a war with Iran. What's that got to do with us, right? And a lot of Americans, even on the MAGA side, you can go all the way to the far right, and they agree with me on this. Like they're like, this is not our war.
Right.
What is in your view, if you look at the way that Bibi Netanyahu is operating, it seems to me that he thinks that he, like Vladimir Putin, can play daddy to Trump, because Trump is not an autocrat without a daddy. He has one daddy for sure, Vladimir Putin, who pushes him around whenever he wants. Bibi in this little country seems to think that he also is a daddy of Trump.
Yes. Trump is not very smart, right? And so he can be played by all kinds of people. We see this with the trade deals all the time, right? Trump says, you have to do A, B, and C, or I'm going to crush your economy. And then these governments come up with something. Turns out often it's basically meaningless, right? But they sell it to Trump as if Trump, you forced us, we're knuckling under. And then Trump limps these tariffs, and it's all just total bullshit. So Israel, in a way, did its own version of this. Israel's been wanting to attack Iran. Israel basically got the U.S. to make a series of demands on Iran that anybody who knew anything about this knew Iran was not going to meet. It was never going to basically stop all enriched uranium. They basically gave their own intelligence estimates, which were at variance with America's, that said Iran was on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon, even though that's not what U.S. intelligence was saying. Right. And then when they bombed, and then Trump thought, wow, they're getting all this credit. Look at all these things they're blowing up. We got to get in on that act. I got to get the credit. We got to blow some stuff up. We have even bigger planes, right? So he does this, right? But the key thing in terms of Israeli politics is that this is popular in Israel. The attack on Iran is very popular in Israel. The attack on Hezbollah was popular in Israel. So it gives Netanyahu the political space, he may think, to basically go to a ceasefire in Gaza, in which essentially it becomes clear that Israel has not achieved its goals, but he'll claim, I've been so successful in these other places that now he can go to an election. And before that, he wasn't willing to do this to end the assault on Gaza because I think he thought it would politically doom him, whereas now he thinks he may be able to win the next election.
Right. And the goal is to stay in power for life. I mean, it's clear that he, like Trump, wants to be in power for life, and for the same reason, right? He avoids prosecution by remaining in power.
Yes.
He's got corruption charges just looming for him and his wife.
Yes, and people always figured that once the war in Gaza ended, his coalition would probably crack apart and they'd have to go to elections. But now he feels like he's in a position to do that. And Trump has also been supporting him. Trump came out recently and said, you know, they should end this trial of Netanyahu. It's all fake, right? I mean, what a shock that Trump would not support would be sympathetic to someone who was on trial for corruption. So Bibi's political situation has now given him, he thinks, perhaps the maneuverability to basically end a war that people have been saying should be ended for more than a year now, because people have known that the only way to get the hostages out was to stop the war, and B, that the war was killing vast numbers of innocent people, and C, that it wasn't going to succeed on its own terms. But Netanyahu needed to get himself in the right political spot before he could basically accept those realities.
The other thing that this war has done is it's shifted, the first week of after October 7, 2023, there was tremendous sympathy for Israel. I mean, these kids who were at a concert were killed, and people said, oh my God, this is horrible. And there was a wave of sympathy. And the minute they started killing and bombing en masse Palestinian kids, that was done. Because now you had Israel denying the media access to Gaza, not letting people see what was going on, but Palestinians were showing their own death. They were showing their own demise. They were documenting what was happening to them, and the just viciously disproportionate response shocked and alarmed a lot of Americans who said, no, this is too much. This is not it's not proportional. And then there was also just sort of the intrigue. Haaretz did some fantastic reporting that they weren't quite honest. It wasn't 1,200 kids at the concert. It was a lot of IDF and a lot of police. And it was a lot of mismanagement on their side. They had a year warning about this and did nothing about it, and then took 9 hours to respond. If you cared about these kibbutzim and these kids, where was the IDF to help them? There was a lot of questions that started to feel a little 9/11-y, right? And so people started going, wait a minute. And then you just had this just absolute fury from a lot of particularly young Americans about us, the United States, providing 2,000-pound bombs to bomb hospitals and schools, and then the lies about Al-Nasser Hospital, et cetera. To me, in the end, you've now had Israel completely lose its almost universal support, among Democrats and Republicans politically in the U.S. South Africa literally filed a genocide case against them and won. They filed an apartheid case against them and won, at least one at this level where it's at now. This has really harmed Israel in the eyes of the world, no? I mean, Bibi Netanyahu has won among right-wing American evangelicals. They love this. But the rest of the world is horrified by this country now.
Right. This is another reason I think that this destruction of Gaza is a strategic defeat for Israel, because it's the public opinion has been moving. Public opinion was already moving even before October 7th in the United States, particularly among young people, away from Israel towards more support for the Palestinians. But the acceleration has just been supercharged by this. I'm not sure that I can think of any issue besides gay marriage on which public opinion has now shifted as dramatically. In 2013, Democrats favored Israel over the Palestinians by 36 points. They now favor Palestinians over Israel by 38 points. And it's not just Democrats. It's true that older Republicans still support Israel, but a plurality of younger Republicans now actually disapprove of Israel. So you have even this younger MAGA group. I mean, it's a very problematic political, sensibility, as you and I both know. But its own particular kind of isolationist politics has coalesced around thinking that what are we doing, basically allowing Israel to drag us into these conflicts, and so. The long-term political consequences for Israel and its relationship with the United States, even in Germany, a country that's historically very, very supportive of Israel, you see Israel's support is absolutely plummeting. This is going to be a consequence for Israel for a really, really long time to come. And, and it's important to remember, you mentioned the Palestinian journalists in Gaza. One day, there will be Western journalists who go into Gaza, right? And when those people, who have go into Gaza and walk through that utterly devastated area. Think how Americans are going to react then when the cameras of mainstream American media can actually film this.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the consequences of that, because I want to swing back to U.S. politics for a moment in a very specific way in a city where you are in New York. So AIPAC, this incredibly powerful, almost disproportionately powerful entity, even though they don't always win on their elections, and sometimes they fights they were going to win anyway, like what they did in New York, where they overpaid to try to remove Jamal Bowman from a district that had been redistricted to make it more Westchester than the Bronx. And so that was probably going to be a seat that was going to be hard to hold on to, but they overspent. I mean, they went hard they spent more money on that race than any other race to try to unseat Jamal Bowman because of his support for Palestinians. They did the same thing to Cori Bush, went a whole overspend. In that case, she probably could have survived that seat, but they gave her opponent, Wesley Bell, just unlimited money. He's I think their number 2 biggest spend. Summer Lee, they couldn't get her. They tried, but literally everyone in the squad that they thought they could take out, they tried. They tried to go after AOC. Anyone who speaks in favor of Palestinians has got to go. They give a lot of money to Democrats and Republicans. Hakeem Jeffries, lots of Democrats get money as well as Republicans. However, the attempts to demonize just anybody who's for Palestinians, not so effective, because Zohran Mamdani, who is now the official Democratic nominee for mayor of New York, the biggest mayoralty in the United States. He survived all sorts of attacks trying to claim he's anti-Semitic because in college he was a pro-Palestinian protester, and they've tried to tie him to anything that people don't like about the language of those protests. What do you make of the fact that he has survived that and is on a good track to win anyway?
Yeah, I mean,
without Democratic Party support, by the way.
Right, because Zohran Mamdani is to the left. He's more pro-Palestinian and more anti-Israel than even Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. I mean, this guy, he's a supporter of the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. There's Bernie Sanders and AOC don't even take that position, right? He basically does not support Israel as a Jewish state. He supports Israel as a state with equality for all of its citizens. It's remarkable. I think, partly, he's an extremely gifted politician. He's an extraordinary talent. He was running against Andrew Cuomo, who was a sexual harasser, who basically is just somebody that nobody had really any enthusiasm for. Who was
Except the Democratic elite, Peter. The Democratic elite, they sent members of Congress from out of state who weren't even from New York to all go and back Cuomo just to make sure that it was not going to be Mamdani.
Right, absolutely, but it just shows how completely out of touch they were, right? Mamdani was really captivated a lot of Muslim and South Asian voters who had never had someone who they could relate to in this way. He was very, he started out his campaign by talking to people who had voted for Trump and basically talking about cost of living, which he made central to his campaign. But yes, the other reason they couldn't defeat him on this was that public opinion has really dramatically changed on this issue. And even though he was constantly depicted, Mamdani, as a threat to Jewish New Yorkers, the polling showed that he got a significant percentage of the Jewish vote. I'm convinced that if you did a poll of Jewish New Yorkers, voters under the age of 40, that Mamdani won, right? So it just shows that we have a mainstream media discourse and a political establishment of the Democratic Party that has a discourse on this subject that is just more and more out of touch with the reality that actually exists among Americans.
Yes, and because and I would bet the same thing, all right? Because every Jewish New Yorker I know voted for Mamdani, and they did because I think there is this supposition that Trump does it, but then Democrats criticize him for doing it, but then they do it, assuming that every Jewish voter votes solely on whatever Israel wants in that moment, whatever that government is, whether that government is right wing or not. They vote with it, whatever Bibi Netanyahu wants. Every American Jewish person also wants the same thing. And I think that is such a dangerous assumption for the Democratic Party to make. And they are acting as if everyone must take the knee to Bibi Netanyahu in order to be a Democratic Party politician. What Kirsten Gillibrand did, Gillibrand was the leading voice to get Al Franken removed as a United States Senator over some BS, I'm sorry, for him taking pictures that goofy pictures. And they made him seem like, like Jack the Ripper. And she led that drive to get rid of him when they needed his vote in the Senate. And yet, here she was,
Right.
I guess, in favor of a guy who did worse. Andrew Cuomo, allegedly. He denies it, but he's allegedly did worse. She'd rather have him than Mamdani. And then said some things about him that kind of skated close to defamation.
Absolutely. I mean, right. And now some of the people are going to line up behind Eric Adams. I mean, it just shows that this is the reason that I think that 2028 is ripe for a candidate who takes a more progressive view and full-throatedly supports Palestinian rights, because this is, in a kind of a way, a house of cards. It's true there's a lot of money behind it and powerful political forces, but these people like Kirsten Gillibrand and Hakeem Jeffries and a lot of these guys, like, I don't believe they really believe this stuff for a second, to be honest. They just know that politically they've been told for as long as ever since they entered politics, that in order to survive, you have to say A, B, C, and D, and you don't say, D, E, F, and G, right? Whether you believe it, whether it makes any sense, whether it bears any relationship to the reality that people are seeing on their screens, and it's just not credible anymore. And when you have a candidate who's actually just willing to say some basic truths, which is like, Israeli Jews and Palestinians should be treated equally. They both deserve to be safe. They both deserve to be free. We could be doing better things with our money than giving them to Israel to blow up hospitals and amputate children. You kind of burst through this edifice of bullshit, and people say, not just left-wing, young, quote-unquote, woke people, but most people just say, that sounds right to me.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it, and this is the thing that we don't talk about in mainstream media at all. It just isn't something that comes up. And I think it needs to come up. A lot of Americans and a lot of young people are looking at the idea that somebody can get on a plane from, get on a flight at Newark Airport, land in Tel Aviv, get on a car, drive out to the West Bank, and bang on the door of some Palestinian family and say, hey, people of my same religious faith lived here 2,000 years ago, get out. This is my house now, and put a gun to their head and have the IDF back them up and help them evict this family. Like, people are looking at the idea of settlers and settlements and saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. You can't make claims on these people's farms and olive trees. And they're standing there holding their 120-year-old deed to their farm and out in the street because you said, what now? You can't. And I think people are looking at that and they're saying, this does not sound right to me.
Absolutely. I mean, even in the West Bank, which doesn't get much attention because of what's happening in Gaza, there's been just enormous amounts of violence against Palestinians who are basically totally defenseless because they don't have citizenship. The state that has life and death power over them is not responsive to them because they can't vote for it, right? They live under military law. They don't have an army and a police force that defends them. The army and police force defends the settlers, right? And I think also a lot of Americans understand that we're in a struggle here in America between the principle of equality under the law and the principle that basically this country belongs to one particular tribe, right? The white Christian tribe, right? And we're struggling desperately against that, right? And so it just doesn't make any sense for Democrats who say that this is what they believe in America, that, people should be treated equally, to then turn around and say, okay, yeah, but a system of Jewish supremacy basically is okay in Israel and Palestine, right? It makes no sense. And I think it's become more and more obvious to people as the years pass.
Why then do you say, and I love talking to you about this because you're so forthright about it and your own struggle in your own family sometimes in trying to make these cases, to people, because people who are more conservative, older people, it's hard for them to get there, right? To change their mind. Yes. Why is it, in your view, does the conversation we just had, why do people deem it anti-Semitic to be critical of Israel?
Well, because I think people conflate Jews with the state of Israel. Right. And so if you're against the state of Israel, you're against Jews. Right. But it just doesn't make any sense. Right. We wouldn't say that because you have a problem with the People's Republic of China and you don't like its political system and you think they could have a better political system, that you're hostile to Chinese people. Right. Or that if you have a problem with the political system in Zambia or Kenya or Sudan, right, you're anti-black. Right. It just doesn't make sense. These are states. States are self-interested entities. They can often be oppressive, regardless of whether they're what color and race and religion they are. And you have to be able to critique them, especially when it's, in this case, when our government is so heavily supporting them, right? And actually, it turns out, as you know, Joy, it turns out that a lot of the strongest supporters of Israel, actually, in Europe and the United States, don't like Jews very much.
Right.
Right. And because they are ethno-nationalists who are like,
Right.
Jews are great when Jews are in their country,
Right.
not so great when they're in our country, you know? And so but unfortunately, mainstream establishment Jewish leaders tend to make this conflation. And I think too often politicians and people in the media they buy it.
It's such an important point to make that some of the earliest Zionists in Europe were not Jewish. They were Christian, and they hated Jewish people and wanted them expelled from Europe and all sent over there. And the whole point was to get rid of them. It's similar to the people in the Abraham Lincoln era who were very much for the creation of Liberia. Not because they liked black people, because they wanted to get rid of black people. They were like, if we create a homeland for blacks in Africa, we can get rid of them. Come on.
Exactly right. So just like Marcus Garvey recognized that there was some commonality of interest with white racists who didn't want black people around, Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, said the anti-Semites will be our great supporters, right? Because he said they don't want those Jews. We don't want the Jews in Europe. Great. They've got another place to go, right? And so it's not illogical, right? It's been this way for, since the 19th century, right? But unfortunately, the mainstream media often doesn't recognize this. And what essentially happens is, you and I know also that Jews have been generally overrepresented in these campus protests, in the protests on the streets, right? But because the connection, but the idea of being Jewish and supporting Israel is so strong that it's like those people don't get coded as Jews. They're not real Jews, right?
They're bad Jews. They're bad Jews. They're not real. They're not real.
So
I've heard it. The people say they're not real Jews.
So we don't need to care about them, right? But then this is why people are surprised by Zohran Mamdani, because there are a lot of those bad Jews, and a lot of them really like Zohran Mamdani, and that's part of the reason he won.
Yeah. Peter Binard, it is always a pleasure. Thank you. We've gone over time with you because it's so much fun talking with you. Please come back.
Absolutely.
And we will talk more. I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Great to see you.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share this channel. Make sure that everybody subscribes to the YouTube channel. 70% of people are lurking, watching these shows and not subscribing. Why would you do that? So make sure that you like, subscribe, and throw some comments in. Thank you all for joining the Joy Reid Show. See you on the next one. And goodbye for now.